The sound is unnervingly soft. Not a gunshot, not a scream, just the quiet, rhythmic scrape of a steel rod being pushed into the ground. Pulled out, pushed in again. A woman is crouching in a field somewhere in western Mexico. The sun is brutal. The earth is cracked and pale. She pulls the rod out of the soil, brings the tip slowly to her nose, and she smells it. She is a mother. She is looking for her child. And the thing she is smelling for is death. This is not a scene from a film. This is not a dramatization. This is happening right now, in real time, across dozens of states in the country of Mexico. It has been happening every single day for nearly 2 decades. The number of people who have been officially registered as disappeared in Mexico has surpassed 127,000. 127,000 human beings. To try to feel the weight of that number, imagine an entire city. A city the size of Boulder, Colorado. A city the size of Hartford, Connecticut. Every man, woman, and child inside it, just gone. Not dead, not officially. Not alive, not provably. Just gone. Erased. But they haven't simply gone missing. That word, missing, implies accident. Implies misfortune. Implies something that happened without intention. What happened to these 127,000 people was entirely intentional. It was systematic. It was methodical. It was perfected. Today, I am going to show you exactly how it works. How the cartels make people disappear. Where the bodies go. What happens to them. And who, with nothing but a steel rod and a set of broken GPS coordinates, goes looking for them anyway. Because this is not just a story about the dead. It is a story about the people who refuse to let them stay hidden. Let's begin. The scale of the abyss. 30 people. That is how many people disappear in Mexico every single day. Not in a war zone, not in an active combat theater. In a country that is, officially, at peace. A country with beaches and universities and a Nobel Prize-winning literature tradition and one of the most visited tourist destinations on the planet. 30 people every day since December of 2006. That was when the Mexican government, under President Felipe Calderón, launched a full military offensive against the country's powerful drug cartels. It was a decision made with the best of intentions and some of the worst of outcomes. Instead of dismantling the criminal organizations, the war on drugs fractured them. And when criminal empires fracture, the violence doesn't decrease. It multiplies. Splintered groups fight for territory. New alliances form and collapse. Ordinary people, caught in between, pay the price. Since 2006, criminal violence has claimed an estimated 480,000 lives in Mexico. And a parallel, quieter count runs alongside it. 127,000 disappeared. Who are they? Here is what you need to understand first. The disappeared are not overwhelmingly criminals. They are teachers and students, engineers and farmers, police officers, bus drivers, small business owners, mothers picking up groceries, teenagers walking home from school. Their faces smile from the photographs. They are weathered and smudged from months or years on a telephone pole or a corkboard in a police precinct that never investigated anything. Their names are whispered in prayers and shouted in protests in the main square every Thursday night. The word that is used for what happened to them in Spanish is desaparecido, disappeared. But as a human rights framework, disappearance is not a state of being. It is a verb, an act. The enforced disappearance is classified as a crime against humanity under international law. It works like this. A person is abducted, usually by criminal organizations, and often with the direct participation or willful blindness of state forces. The authorities then refuse to acknowledge what happened. They refuse to confirm where the person is or whether they are alive. The family is left in a legal and emotional void, unable to grieve and unable to hope. It is a cruelty that has been specifically engineered. The not knowing is the weapon, the motive of erasure. The cartels, and the two most powerful among them are the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known by its Spanish acronym CGNG, and the older, more established Sinaloa Cartel, have turned enforced disappearance into a pillar of their operating model. Their motives are a precise cocktail of business and terror. Elimination of rivals. When a competing cartel operates in your territory, or when a member of your own organization threatens your power, disappearing them is cleaner than a public execution. It removes the problem without the forensic trail that a body creates. Silencing witnesses. Someone saw something they shouldn't have. A journalist got too close. A local official refused to cooperate. They disappear. Terror as control. And this is where the psychology becomes truly dark. A body left in the street sends a message, yes. But a person who simply vanishes, with no explanation, no body, no evidence creates a different kind of fear. A quieter fear. A fear that metastasizes because it has no shape and no boundary. It says to every person in that community, it could happen to you, and no one will ever know. The state of Jalisco, the stronghold of the CGNG, officially lists over 15,900 missing persons. Activists and search collectives on the ground believe the true figure is substantially higher. The cartels, particularly the CGNG, have been so powerful and so brazen that the United States designated the organization as a global terrorist group, specifically citing its role in flooding American streets with fentanyl. The fentanyl crisis killing tens of thousands of Americans every year is, in a direct and concrete way, connected to the clandestine graves in the Mexican countryside. The money flows north. The chemicals come from Asia. The drugs are produced in Mexico. And the violence required to protect that supply chain is paid for in Mexican lives. So the question is not simply who did this. It is how. How do you make 127,000 people disappear from the face of the earth and leave no trace? The answer, it turns out, is written in the soil itself. The grim art of erasure. Making a person disappear completely requires a particular kind of ingenuity. A science, if you can call something so monstrous by that word. The cartels have developed it over decades, and it has evolved. Phase 1 is the fossa clandestina, the clandestine grave. The clandestine graves. A fossa clandestina is not a formal burial plot. It is a raw, brutal hole in the earth, dug quickly and without ceremony. They are found in remote mesquite-covered plains at the edges of cities, in vacant industrial lots on the outskirts of Guadalajara and Culiacan, in the basements of abandoned houses, in the middle of fields that look, from a distance, like nothing at all. In Zapopan, a municipality within the greater Guadalajara metropolitan area, a citizen search group received an anonymous tip that something was buried in a vacant lot. When authorities eventually excavated the site, they did not find a single grave. They found 48 black plastic bags filled with human remains. Officials could not immediately determine how many victims were represented in those bags. That is not an accident. Dismemberment is, from the cartel's perspective, a logistical tool. It makes bodies easier to transport and easier to distribute across multiple sites. But its most critical function is forensic sabotage. A dismembered body turns the work of identification into an extraordinarily difficult puzzle. Multiple victims mixed together become almost impossible to separate definitively without advanced DNA testing. In a second find in the same municipality, the remains of 34 more people were discovered during routine construction work. The graves are everywhere. In Mezquitillo, Sinaloa, a search collective called Sabuesos Guerreras tracked an anonymous tip to a site that authorities had repeatedly declined to investigate. When the women of the collective went themselves, they found a clandestine cemetery that had been in active use for years. Some of the 11 bodies they recovered were recent. Others had decomposed to skeletons. The cartels are continuously adding to their hidden graveyards. It is a layered timeline of death written in the earth. The crematoriums. But the clandestine grave is merely the first chapter. Because the cartels discovered a problem with burial. Burial leaves evidence. Bones persist for centuries. DNA survives in them. They can be found by families with steel rods, by journalists with satellite imagery, by construction workers hitting something unexpected with a backhoe. And so the cartels evolved. They moved from burying their secrets to burning them. In March of 2025, a search collective called Guerreros Buscadores de Jalisco, acting on a tip, entered a ranch property called Izaguirre near the town of Tucatlan in Jalisco State. What they found there stopped them in their tracks. 3 underground furnaces, crude in construction but functional in purpose. Crematoriums built specifically to turn human beings into ash and fragments of bone. The ground around them was scattered with charred remains. Teeth, bone splinters, the residue of lives reduced to material. But it was not the furnaces that undid the searchers. It was the shoes. Over 400 pairs of shoes, scattered across the property. Small sneakers, worn work boots, high heels, children's shoes, each pair belonging to someone who had walked onto that property alive and had never walked off it. The searchers also found notebooks, backpacks, and a handwritten farewell letter. The Tucatlan Ranch revealed something beyond the horror of its contents. Because in September of 2024, just months before the collective's discovery, official authorities had inspected that same ranch. They had arrested 10 people. They had rescued 2 captives who were being held there. And they had officially reported finding nothing of significance. Nothing. Despite 3 underground ovens. Despite the ground scattered with human bone. Despite 400 pairs of shoes. The full spectrum of disappearance. Tucatlan was not an outlier. Search collectives have identified at least 6 other clandestine crematoriums in Jalisco State alone since late 2023. In Colima, searchers found a 40-hectare ranch being used as a cartel disposal site. Alongside burned remains, they found traces of industrial chemicals. In Sinaloa, a survivor told the Sabuesos Guerreras collective about an abandoned wastewater treatment plant that had been converted into a disposal facility. He had escaped by hiding inside a septic tank for 24 hours. When the collective investigated and opened the tanks, bodies floated to the surface. Bodies floating to the surface of a septic tank. This is the art of erasure in its fullest expression. Whether dissolved in acid, incinerated in underground furnaces, dismembered and packed into plastic bags, or sunk in industrial waste tanks, the goal is identical. To turn a human being into a non-person. To create a mystery where there was a murder. To destroy evidence so completely that the crime never officially happened. The searchers, Where the state has failed, the people have risen. The people who are actually finding the disappeared are the families of the disappeared. They are called the colectivos de búsqueda, the search collectives, and they are overwhelmingly women. Who they are? They call themselves seekers, searchers, warriors, hounds, guerreros buscadores de Jalisco, sabuesos guerreras, búsqueda por la paz, luz de esperanza. These are women who filed missing persons reports and watched them sit untouched for months. Women who sat in government waiting rooms and were told the investigation was ongoing. Women who watched their children's faces fade on posters until the photograph became unrecognizable. And then instead of going home, they bought steel rods and maps, and they went out into the desert themselves. The collective becomes the family's second family. These women know each other's grief the way only those who share it can. They drive to sites together at 4 in the morning. They dig in brutal heat. They photograph everything with precision and upload it to shared drives because they have learned that evidence handed to authorities sometimes disappears. The tools and the method. Their most essential tool is the varilla, a long steel rod used to probe the ground. The collectives walk in slow, deliberate lines across suspected burial sites, pressing the rods into the earth every meter or so. When they pull the rod out, they smell it. They are smelling for the unmistakable odor of human decomposition. They operate on anonymous tips, a message through a burner phone app, a scrawled address left under a windshield wiper, a voice on a phone line saying only, "There is something in the field behind the church." The tips come from former cartel members, from locals who know where the bodies are but are too afraid to speak to authorities, from people whose conscience has finally become too heavy. The collectives follow these breadcrumbs into some of the most dangerous territories in Mexico. They carry GPS units. They document everything with photos and video. They work in pairs and groups. Since the search collectives began organizing, at least 28 people doing this work have been killed or have themselves disappeared. The emotional cost. One searcher named Anna, whose sister was abducted from her home, describes her relationship to the work with devastating clarity. She says, "I know I am not going to find her, but I keep searching because I need a place to put the flowers." A place to put the flowers. The grief is no longer about hope. It is about the basic human need for a place, a physical point on the earth where love can be expressed. Every dig is a wager. The hope that the person you are looking for might be here somewhere in this field. At one site near the city of La Paz, a collective worked for months across a vast area indicated by a partial tip. What they eventually recovered were 44 skeletons, 44 people who might have remained officially missing forever. The technology of remembrance. A collective in Jalisco called Luz de Esperanza has taken the fight into the digital space. They use artificial intelligence to create what they call living search cards. They animate photographs of the disappeared. The face moves. The eyes blink. And using a synthesized version of the missing person's voice, the image speaks. A card appears on a phone screen. A young man, 18 years old. His photograph begins to move. He says, "I am Carlos Maximiliano. I was 18 years old when I disappeared. I want to tell you my story." When a number reaches 127,000, a human brain cannot process it. But when a face looks at you and speaks its name, it becomes impossible to ignore. These collectives are performing a duty the state has abandoned. They are forensic investigators, detectives, archaeologists, and gravediggers. And they are doing it without training, funding, or protection. The narco cemetery. Now consider something completely different. While cartel victims are reduced to ash or buried in unmarked pits, the cartels themselves have built palaces for their dead. Jardins del Humaya. Jardins del Humaya is a cemetery on the outskirts of Culiacan in Sinaloa State. It has become known as the world's most famous narco cemetery. Walking through it is not like walking through a graveyard. It feels like a luxury housing development. The mausoleums are multi-story buildings made from marble and polished granite. Many have bulletproof glass, security cameras, air conditioning, living rooms, flat-screen televisions, and satellite dishes. Some have Wi-Fi. Some have balconies. One reportedly has a bar. These tombs cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes more than $1 million. Inside them lie men who helped build the machinery of disappearance. Arturo Beltran Leyva, Ignacio Coronel, Arturo Guzman Lora, and the most extravagant tomb of all belongs to Amado Carrillo Fuentes, known as the Lord of the Skies. His mausoleum is a 3-story structure inspired by the Taj Mahal, with a chapel capable of holding 40 people. What the tombs say. These tombs are not about grief. They are about power. They send a message: we are above the law. In life and in death, they serve as recruitment tools. A young man with few options sees those structures and understands where the power lies. They are territorial markers. Our dead are celebrated here while your dead lie in unmarked pits. On certain days, families gather with musicians playing narco corridos, ballads celebrating cartel figures. The cemetery becomes a festival of memory and power. And the contrast is almost impossible to process. A mother kneeling in the desert smelling a steel rod. And somewhere nearby, one of the men responsible for that disappearance lies in an air-conditioned marble tomb. This is the dual reality of death in cartel-era Mexico. For the victims, erasure. For their executioners, marble-clad immortality. The system of impunity. The question that remains is simple. How does this happen in a country with a government, courts, police, and laws? In 2021, official data showed that across all of Mexico, only 36 judgments had ever been issued in cases of enforced disappearance. 36 out of 127,000. That is not a functioning justice system. The corruption underneath. The reason is corruption. Systemic corruption that runs from local police to political offices. A 2024 study from the University of Guadalajara found that between 2018 and 2024, 306 public servants in the state of Jalisco alone were prosecuted in connection with cases of forced disappearance. And even that likely represents only a fraction of the true scale. The Tucatlan Ranch demonstrates the problem clearly. Authorities visited a property containing underground crematoriums and hundreds of victims' belongings, and they officially reported finding nothing. Either they failed to see what was there, or they chose not to report it. Both possibilities describe a state that has lost control. The transnational engine. The cartels are not just gangs. They are transnational criminal corporations operating in the most lucrative illegal market in history. The global drug trade, particularly fentanyl trafficking to the United States, generates billions of dollars each year. With that kind of money, you do not bribe a single police officer. You buy entire institutions. The chemicals come from Asia. The drugs are produced in Mexico. They are distributed across the United States. The profits move through global financial networks. And the violence that protects that system is paid for in Mexican lives. The American overdose crisis and the Mexican disappearance crisis are two sides of the same system. The government response. The Mexican government has passed laws and created agencies to address the crisis. The 2017 General Law on Disappearances was a major step forward on paper, but implementation has been weak and underfunded. In March of 2025, after outrage over the Tocatlan discovery, President Claudia Sheinbaum announced new reforms, including strengthening the National Search Commission and creating a universal database of missing persons. Families of the disappeared responded with cautious skepticism. They have heard promises before. Until corruption is dismantled, financial networks disrupted, and demand for drugs addressed, the number will continue to rise. 127,000 will become 130,000, then 150,000, and the women with steel rods will continue searching. The registry of the disappeared in Mexico is a living document. 127,000, 128,000, 130,000. Each number represents a life. This is not a story with a neat ending, but one image remains. A woman in a field in the late afternoon. Her knees are dirty. Her back aches. She has been searching for years. She pushes a steel rod into the earth. She pulls it out and smells it. Nothing. She takes one step to the left and pushes it into the ground again. In the face of an evil designed to erase, the act of searching becomes a declaration. You existed. You mattered. I have not accepted your erasure. The search continues. If you made it to the end of this video, that means you chose not to look away from something that much of the world ignores. The search collectives in Mexico operate almost entirely without government support. Many rely on donations for equipment and supplies to continue their work. If this story moved you and you want to help, information about organizations supporting these collectives will be in the description. Now I want to hear from you. What hit you hardest in this story? The scale of the numbers? The Tocatlan discovery? The shoes? The narco cemetery? The women with the steel rods? Leave a comment and share what stayed with you. If you are new to this channel, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel exists to tell stories that deserve more than a headline. And please share this video. The families of the 127,000 have been asking the world to pay attention for a long time. The least we can do is listen. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.